Welcome to Music Matters with RIAA. I'm your host tonight, Tom Clees. June is LGBTQ plus Pride Month, and tonight it's my distinct privilege to moderate a conversation between two individuals who have broken barriers in their respective fields when it comes to LGBTQ plus representation. Tonight I'll be having a conversation with Congressman David Cicilline of Rhode Island and singer-songwriter Brooke Eden, coming to us live from Nashville. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
And Brooke, thank you so much for joining us from Nashville.
Good to be here.
So the first question that I want to ask each of you is, in 2022, obviously there's a lot going on, and Pride means something different this year than it did even a year or two ago. What is at the top of your Pride playlist? What are you listening to? Let's start with you, Congressman.
Well, I actually have a Pride playlist, and on top of mine is Love Me More by Sam Smith, and I have 7 other songs.
We're going to have to get into that in a little while, but it's always impossible to make people limited to just one song. Brooke, is there one song that has that meaning for you right now?
This is the most cliche answer ever, but it is the truest answer to me, and that is Born This Way by Lady Gaga. Every single time I hear that song, it just makes me feel like it's on, like Pride is on, and just love who you are.
You came out in 2021. How has that changed your world and the way that your public life has gone from then to now?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's changed every aspect of my world, everywhere from my personal life to my professional life. I'm just so much more of an open book. I feel so much more within myself. And I mean, yeah, it's changed so many things. I feel like there are no more walls. I feel like there used to be walls. There used to be so much that went into saying the right pronoun. And now it's just, I get to be myself. And I'm different when I'm writing a song. I can write from a very real, true place that I wasn't able to go to before I came out. On stage, I feel like I'm more free. And just in general, I feel more free. And also I feel like I'm just a cheerleader for everyone else as well, for them to be themselves.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Congressman, you're someone who's been breaking barriers for some time. You were the first out mayor of a US Capitol, and you've been in this politics game for a while. How have you seen LGBTQ plus representation change from when you first got into politics to the folks getting elected now that you're seeing?
Well, when I first got involved in politics, there were not as many out LGBTQ plus people who were either candidates or held office. When I came to Congress, for example, there were only 4 out members of Congress in the House. There are now 9. We have 2 in the Senate, so we have 11 members of our community. We're going to have more this election cycle. But I've seen tremendous growth in terms of our representation, but we're still very much underrepresented in terms of the population that we represent. So we have a lot more work to do. Sadly, we're still in a fight for equality for our community. We still remain the only population in America that it's legal to discriminate in, and we have no federal protections against discrimination. So that fight is ongoing, but it makes a big difference to have members of our community in the fight, in the room. That old saying, if you're not in the room, you're on the menu. And if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Representation matters. And so it's important for our colleagues to see members of our community in Congress. So as we're fighting for equality, they know it affects us. It's also really important, for Brooke and others, for young people to see artists and politicians and, teachers and police officers who are members of our community. There are lots and lots of young people that are still struggling with their sexual orientation or gender identity, who don't live in places where they feel safe to come out and be authentically who they are. And every time they see an out person, whatever walk of life you're in, it gives them some strength. It gives them a sign that they're okay. It's okay to be who you are and to get some courage to be able to come out and be themselves. So I think we, members of the LGBTQ community realize every day when we get up and go to work, whatever we do, hopefully we're providing some strength to others who are still struggling.
And following up on that, you mentioned about how the community, this is the only community that can be legally discriminated against. You're doing a few things about that. Would you want to tell us a little bit about your work on that issue?
Yes, so I authored something called the Equality Act, which prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in really all areas of life: housing, employment, public accommodations, jury service, federal funding, and education. It takes all the existing civil rights law and just adds those two categories to the other categories of race and gender and ethnic origin. It's really the only way, once and for all, to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in America. We passed it out of the House twice. We passed it most recently last February. It's now sitting in the Senate, and we're working hard to get it to the president's desk so that we can all live in a country where we can live lives free of discrimination. Because when members of the LGBTQ community are discriminated against, it doesn't only harm that individual, it also harms the community that is robbed of the full potential of that individual because of the discrimination. So this is urgent and important, and we're going to make it happen.
So, Brooke, you're outside of the Washington bubble. You don't see the sort of things that we're seeing all the time. Out where you are, in a community of songwriters and musicians, what is the feeling for someone in the community and a representative of your community when you're seeing the work that Congressman Cicilline are doing, when others are, it's still not happening and they're still running into a wall? How is that translating for you? How much of this work are you seeing done, and what more could be done to make it visible in your community?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to say, preach. Everything that you just said is so important. Thank you so much for what you do day in and day out for our community. It's so massively important. You're right. I don't understand how we are the one group, marginalized group, that just has no laws against discriminating against us. It's so wild. And there's so much, mental health that goes into this, especially for kids who don't really know how to deal with mental health yet. So yeah, thank you for everything that you're doing. I will say that in our community, 2020 was a big moment for us as a genre. We, as a country music genre, have been mostly known for white, straight males almost, but there are some females in there as well, but very white, very straight, very conservative. And I think that in 2020, we all had this moment of, let's put all the BS aside and let's focus on the things that really matter. And what country music is all about is three chords and the truth. That is what country music from the beginning is about. How are we supposed to sing about our truth if we're not telling our truth in real life? So, 2021 came around, and in the middle to end of 2020, I was reading a book by Glennon Doyle called Untamed. And the book, it's about a lot of different things, but this one specific paragraph that she wrote about was a paragraph about integrity. And she clearly defined integrity as portraying to the world who you are in your own home. And I realized in that moment that I was living with no integrity and I couldn't do it anymore. I actually got physically sick. I had ulcers in my small intestine that were causing me to be very anemic, and I was having to get IV infusions of iron, and it was a really hard time. And my doctor point blank told me, there's something emotionally going on in here. This is not a physical ailment. This is something emotional that you're going to have to deal with. And so between that happening with my actual physical health and the integrity moment in this book that I was reading, and more of my mental health, I realized that I had to come out. And I was scared, but at the same time, I felt like no matter what, I was going to be free for the first time, free to tell my truth, free to sing about my truth. And I think that as an artist, that's the most important thing. And so I came out, and luckily I was met with loving arms and so much support. And also we have a lot of Black artists who are coming into the country music industry, and a lot of Latino artists that are coming in as well that nobody ever looked at us because we were, in marginalized parts of society. So there's been a lot of change, a lot of progression in the right forward motion in country music, which has, kind of forever been a little behind the times as far as, as far as societal norms go. But yeah, it's scary to think that as America, we're this huge free country, everyone has this American dream, and everyone's allowed to have that American dream except for the LGBTQ community in a lot of ways. So I'm so grateful that we have committees like the one that you're on, and and representation like you in DC.
So Brooke, just to stay on this point for one more moment, there's a song of yours that sticks out to me, Left You For Me. It kind of seems like some of these themes have been coming out in your work. Could you tell me a little bit about how that song came together and how it's been received by your fans?
Yeah, so it's my current single, actually. When we were writing this song, one of my co-writers had actually just gotten out of a relationship. And I didn't know this, and I was just like, wow, you just seem so light. And he was like, yeah, I just got out of this relationship that I was in for a really long time, and I was nervous for so long about leaving it. And now I'm so much more of myself not being in that relationship. And so we all kind of wrote from different places and different, aspects of our life that contributed to I Left You For Me. And for me, I grew up in a very Christian Baptist background, very conservative family. And I had all of these norms that were ingrained into me. This is how you're supposed to be. This is who you're supposed to love, all of these things. And for me, Left You For Me is about leaving everyone else's expectations behind so that I could become the most authentic version of myself. And it is not the easiest thing to do. And I know that other people have related this song to, being in an abusive relationship. And that's all you've known. So you're almost afraid to not be in that relationship. But moving forward in that really brave step of changing everything that you've known to become a much better version of yourself and have a much better version of your own life. So it's just been really, really cool to see how people have put their own stories into a song that meant something completely different to me than it meant to them. But we all have this same feeling of having to break free from certain chains that are keeping you from being yourself, whatever that might be in their lives.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And there's something that has stuck out to me so much in your description of the difficulty that you experienced and that you've seen others experience in your community being the first and moving their institution forward. Congressman, you're one of those firsts in the world of politics, which can also be very intransigent, as we all know. Are there stories like Brooke's that you've seen in young members of Congress or people who want to be public figures wrestling with this and moving forward with living their authentic lives?
Oh, no question about it. And, as Brooke was speaking, I was thinking one of my songs on my Pride playlist is I Want to Break Free by Queen. So the sort of idea of liberating ourselves is very much a part of the coming out process. There are lots of people who are interested in running for office. When I was growing up, there were a lot of people, Pete Buttigieg is an example, who thought about politics but didn't think they could be in politics because they were LGBTQ. And there was a time when people thought that would make it impossible for you to run for office and win. And we know that's not true anymore. But when people from our community run for office, it causes conversations to happen all across the place where they're running. When I was running for mayor my first time, I went into a church, a Baptist church, and the minister was really excited about my candidacy. He said, "Is there anything about you that I should know that my congregation might have difficulty with?" And I said, thought for me, I said, "Well, I was a criminal defense lawyer. I represented." He said, No, not that." He said, I understand you're very supportive of gay rights. I said, oh yeah, I'm gay. Like I've told. He said, well, what am I supposed to tell my congregation? And I said, you should tell your congregation this is how God created me, and they should respect the creation of God. And he sat back in the chair and he said, that's a pretty good answer. You know, he was on the pulpit next week talking about me being a good mayor for the city. And conversations like that happen all across the country when people from our community run as out candidates. And it can be hard, but you know, we're making progress as a country. The overwhelming and the majority of the American people believe discrimination is wrong. They understand equality is a founding principle of this country. Every time someone comes out, they not only become a greater artist, they become a better public servant, they become a better school teacher, because when you're living a lie and you're not authentic and honest about who you are, it limits you in so many ways. It eats you up. And so when you're free from that and you can just be proud about who you are and free from all those constraints, you're going to be a better human being, a better sibling, a better child, a better professional. And so I think, you know, Brooke's experience of her being even more creative and even sharing more after coming out is consistent with what so many people experience when they come out.
So let's go with that a little bit. And I'm not suggesting anything here, but let's pretend for a minute that Brooke Eden has political aspirations. We're just going to pretend. Not, you know, this is not an announcement. What advice would you give Brooke when, you know, we're living in a different time, but it's still not easy to be an out candidate? What would one piece of advice be that you would want to give her in pursuing public life while living their truth?
I mean, I think the most important advice I would give any person is just to be yourself. You know, understand the power you bring to the role you're seeking. And I think most importantly, and I think as an artist she knows this, be a good listener. Because I think in politics we're trained, you're supposed to have the ideas, you're supposed to advocate for yourself and for the position and for your legislation. I think very often we don't do enough listening. I mean, our first job is to listen to the people we represent or that we're asking to represent, to understand what's the biggest worry in their lives, what are the things they're concerned about. So being a really good listener is, I think, the most important thing.
Let's pretend that Congressman David Cicilline is going to be writing his first album, and he's finding new ways to express himself creatively, both as a representative for his community, both from a political perspective and from a cultural perspective. Brooke, what advice would you give somebody who's trying to write their first record, who's out and trying to live their truth?
I would just say, don't shy away from who you are. I think that it's so important to be unapologetic in who you are. For so long, I was so, you know, being from a very religious background, it is just like ingrained in your DNA that like who you are is wrong. And I just don't believe that the God who created us all and loves us all and is our heavenly Father would have any problem with who we are and who we love. And so I think for a long time, I didn't live in pride. I lived in shame. And I think that if I were to give advice to someone, I would say to live in pride and just be authentically yourself unapologetically. And the people that don't like it will fall to the wayside, and that's a personal problem for them. And the people who do like it, you're actually going to create a more comfortable space to allow them to be themselves because you are being yourself. And it's the only possible way, I think, to be a true artist is to truly show who you are.
Thank you so much for that. Both of you, I am incredibly grateful to have had the opportunity to have this conversation with you. I hope that we can have many more just like this. Again, Congressman, thank you for being here with us. Brooke, thank you for sharing your talent and your wisdom with us from Nashville. And with RIAA, I'm Tom Clees, and we can't wait to see all of you again.
Happy Pride.
Thank
Happy
you.
Pride.